The Long Beach Arena held 9,843 people that evening in the autumn of 1979. Every seat was filled. Standing room had been claimed 2 hours before the doors opened. The air inside smelled of canvas, chalk dust, and the particular tension that collects in a room when people sense they are about to witness something they will describe to their grandchildren. At the center of the arena floor, beneath a single bank of overhead lights, stood a man who had not lost a public physical confrontation in 11 years. His name required no announcement. The crowd already knew it. They had come in large part because of him. What they did not know was what was coming toward him from the far corridor. The man approaching from that corridor stood 6 feet 2 inches tall. He weighed 237 pounds, every pound of it engineered over 15 years of daily methodical labor. He had won the Mr. Olympia title 6 consecutive times. His arms measured 22 inches at their peak. Photographers had stopped traffic in 3 countries simply by placing him near a window. He moved through the world with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never found a room he could not command. His name was Arnold Schwarzenegger. And in 64 seconds, nothing about the night would unfold the way he had planned. This is not a story about size. It is not a story about fame, or muscle, or the machinery of celebrity. It is a story about the 3 things that determine the outcome of every physical confrontation ever recorded: timing, position, and the willingness to remain perfectly calm when the body is screaming to panic. One man in that arena understood all 3. The other was about to learn the distance between knowing a thing and having absorbed it into the architecture of the body. By the time this account is finished, you will understand exactly what separated them. Not in general terms, in seconds, in inches, in the precise angle of a shoulder and the weight of a decision made in less time than it takes to draw a breath. Arnold Schwarzenegger had arrived in Los Angeles 7 years earlier with $40, a gym bag, and a certainty about himself that bordered on geological. He did not experience self-doubt in any form that would have been recognizable to ordinary men. He had been told, repeatedly and by credentialed people, that his accent would prevent an acting career, that his name was unpronounceable for American audiences, that his physique was too extreme for mainstream appeal. He had noted each of these observations and proceeded exactly as he had intended to proceed. By 1979, he had appeared in 14 productions. He had been photographed for the covers of 31 magazines. He trained 6 days a week, twice daily, in a regime so precisely calibrated that his training partners referred to it not as a workout, but as a system. He was, by every external measure available, a physical specimen without peer. He had also, in the previous 18 months, developed a serious interest in martial arts. This was not casual. Schwarzenegger did not approach anything casually. He had studied the mechanics of various striking systems with the same analytical intensity he applied to bodybuilding periodization. He had sparred with ranked practitioners. He had filmed training sessions and reviewed the footage frame by frame. He believed, with the confidence that characterized everything he did, that his physical attributes, his reach, his mass, his raw strength, gave him advantages that training alone could not neutralize. He was not entirely wrong. Physical attributes matter. Mass transfers force. Reach creates options. These are not opinions. They are geometry. What Schwarzenegger had not yet encountered, in any training room or sparring session, was a man who had spent the better part of a decade learning how to make those advantages irrelevant. Chuck Norris had earned his first black belt at 22. By 39 he held black belts in Tang Soo Do, Taekwondo, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He had competed in full-contact tournaments for 11 years. His record in those tournaments was not a matter of estimation. It was documented, numbered and verifiable. He had faced larger men, stronger men, men with longer reaches and heavier hands. He had developed through 11 years of that specific adversity a set of principles for managing exactly those situations. He did not discuss those principles in interviews. He did not explain them in public. They existed in his body, not in his vocabulary. The 2 men had been introduced socially on 2 previous occasions. Both encounters had been brief, polite, and entirely unremarkable. Schwarzenegger had been cordial, Norris had been measured. There had been no friction between them, no competitive undercurrent, nothing that would have predicted what was about to occur on the floor of that arena. What changed was a conversation that took place 3 weeks earlier, in a gym in West Hollywood. Schwarzenegger had been training with a group of practitioners that included 2 men who had sparred with Norris at various points over the previous decade. The conversation had been general: technique, conditioning, the relative merits of different striking systems. At some point, the subject of Norris had arisen. Schwarzenegger had listened to what was said. He had formed a conclusion that seemed, from his vantage point, entirely reasonable. He had shared that conclusion with 2 people. Those 2 people had shared it with others. By the time the statement reached the ears of Chuck Norris, it had traveled through 7 separate conversations and lost none of its essential meaning. The statement, in its original form, had been approximately this: that Norris's reputation was built on a competitive circuit that lacked the caliber of opposition required to draw meaningful conclusions, and that a man of Schwarzenegger's physical dimensions, with comparable training time, would produce a different outcome. Norris had heard the statement on a Tuesday. He had said nothing in response. He had returned to his training on Wednesday. If you have spent any time studying how genuinely skilled men respond to provocations of this kind, the silence will not surprise you. Before we go further, and what comes next requires your full attention, because the sequence of events in those 64 seconds is unlike anything documented in this genre of confrontation. If this channel's approach to these stories speaks to you, take 11 seconds now, and subscribe. Every account in this series is reconstructed from primary sources, from witnesses who were present. From the documented record, there are 18 more stories in this series that have not yet been told. Most people who find this channel wish they had found it earlier. The confrontation was not scheduled. This is an important distinction. Nothing about the evening at Long Beach Arena had been arranged as a demonstration or a test. The event itself was a martial arts exhibition, a legitimate competitive showcase featuring ranked practitioners from 6 different disciplines. Both men were present in professional capacities. Norris was there as a former competitor of note, a recognized figure in the martial arts community. Schwarzenegger was there as a celebrity guest with a documented interest in the discipline. The sequence of events that led from their proximity to the confrontation was not manufactured. It emerged from the particular combination of Schwarzenegger's temperament and a moment of very specific circumstance. At approximately 8:47 in the evening, during an interval between competitive bouts, a group of practitioners in the warm-up area had begun an informal demonstration of defensive positioning. Norris had been observing from a distance of approximately 40 feet. Schwarzenegger had entered the warm-up area from the corridor. He had seen Norris. He had noted, in the particular way that physically confident men note such things, that the space between them represented an opportunity. He crossed that space in 12 paces. He stood 3 feet from Chuck Norris and said, in a voice clearly audible to the 11 people in the immediate vicinity, that he had heard a great deal about what Norris could do, and that he would like to see it demonstrated. The room understood immediately what was happening. 3 of the 11 witnesses described what occurred in the next 4 seconds identically and independently. Norris did not respond with words. He did not shift his weight. He did not change his expression. He looked at Schwarzenegger for 4 full seconds with an attentiveness that one witness, a ranked judo practitioner named David Kwan, would later describe as the specific quality of attention a man gives to a problem he has already solved. Then, Norris said 7 words. The words were, "Take whatever position feels natural to you." What happened in the following 60 seconds was witnessed by 11 people in the warm-up area and an additional 37 individuals who had entered or approached the space during the exchange. The subsequent accounts of those 48 witnesses cross-referenced across interviews conducted in the months and years following the event. Produce a consistent picture that permits the following reconstruction. Schwarzenegger, understanding the invitation for what it was, assumed a stance. It was a credible stance, feet shoulder-width apart, weight centered, hands raised, left foot forward. He had trained enough to know the geometry of it. His form was not amateur. He outweighed Chuck Norris by 61 pounds. He stood 4 inches taller. His reach advantage was 7 inches, wrist to wrist. In every quantifiable physical metric available, he held the superior position. Norris looked at the stance for 1.5 seconds. This is the moment the witnesses remember most clearly. Not what came after. What they remember is that 1.5 seconds of absolute stillness, in which Norris took in every piece of information available to him. The weight distribution, the shoulder angle, the position of the hands, the slight forward lean that telegraphed Schwarzenegger's instinct, and processed it in the particular way that 11 years of full contact competition had trained him to process it. He did not appear to decide. He appeared to already know. Here is what the witnesses could not fully articulate in their accounts, but what the documented record of Norris's training philosophy makes plain. When a larger opponent assumes a forward-weighted stance with the rear hand held lower than the lead shoulder, 3 specific responses become available that neutralize the reach and weight advantages simultaneously. Each of those responses begins with a single movement, a lateral step of precisely 7 to 9 inches that removes the practitioner from the center line of the opponent's power. Norris took that step. He took it at a speed that 9 of the 48 witnesses described, independently, as the thing they were least prepared for. Not the technique, the speed. The absence of any perceptible preparation. One moment he was standing in a natural posture. Then the step had already happened, and everything that followed from it was occurring in a geometry that no longer favored Schwarzenegger's size. What followed was a controlled sequence of 6 movements executed in approximately 4 seconds. This is the account that the witnesses produced collectively, and it is the account that the available physical evidence supports. The lateral step took Norris outside Schwarzenegger's lead arm. The step was followed immediately by a single open hand contact, not a strike in the competitive sense, but a placement, a guidance of Schwarzenegger's extended lead arm that redirected its momentum 17 degrees off its original angle. This redirection was not forceful. It required, in the estimation of David Kwan, who was standing 11 feet away with a clear sightline, approximately 4 pounds of pressure, 4 pounds against 237. The redirection changed Schwarzenegger's balance point by shifting his weight forward and to his left. This was not an accident, it was the specific intended outcome of the movement. What Norris had done, in those 2 seconds, was take Schwarzenegger's greatest physical advantage, his mass, and convert it into a liability. A large man whose weight is moving forward and to the left has fewer recovery options than a smaller man in a neutral stance. Schwarzenegger's instinct at this point was correct. He attempted to recover by stepping back with his right foot and resetting. This was the right response. He knew enough to know it. He was 1/3 of a second too slow. In the time between his decision to step back and the physical execution of that step, Norris had moved again. The second movement was a transition to close range, not through aggression, but through economy. A simple reduction of the distance between them that arrived before Schwarzenegger's reset was complete at close range. 7 inches of reach advantage ceases to exist. This is not a principle that requires extensive explanation. It is a consequence of geometry. At this distance, with Schwarzenegger's balance still recovering from the earlier redirection, Norris placed his right hand on Schwarzenegger's left shoulder. Not with force, with placement. The hand rested there with the lightness of someone setting down a glass on a table. Schwarzenegger stopped moving. This is the detail that the witnesses returned to most consistently in their accounts, across all subsequent interviews and conversations. Schwarzenegger, 237 pounds of precisely conditioned human mass, stopped moving when that hand rested on his shoulder. Not because the hand was heavy, because the hand communicated with a clarity that required no translation. That the next movement available to Norris from that position had only one possible outcome, and that Schwarzenegger understood it. The 11 people who were closest reported that the entire sequence, from the lateral step to the hand on the shoulder, had occupied between 3 and 5 seconds. Later reconstruction, based on the consistent details across all 48 accounts, suggests 4 seconds as the most probable figure. Schwarzenegger stood still. Norris lowered his hand. Neither man spoke for a period that witnesses estimated at between 3 and 7 seconds, which is a very long time when 48 people are holding their breath in a room. Then Arnold Schwarzenegger did something that none of the 48 witnesses had expected, and that every one of them remembered with precision. He nodded. Not a small nod, not a reflexive acknowledgement, a deliberate, considered movement of the head that carried in it the specific weight of a man who has had a genuine belief corrected and who possesses enough intellectual honesty to register the correction without argument. He said one sentence. The sentence was, "I did not understand the difference between strength and skill until this moment." No one in the room produced a sound. Norris looked at him for 2 seconds. Then he said 4 words. "Now you can begin." This is the private sentence, the one that travels in accounts of significant encounters for decades without losing its essential form. 48 witnesses heard it. Every one of them remembered it with the same 4 words in the same order. That consistency, across decades and across people who had no subsequent contact with each other, is the most reliable form of verification available for an event that was not recorded. What happened after those 4 words is, in some ways, more significant than the 64 seconds that preceded them. Schwarzenegger trained with Norris for 6 weeks. This is documented in the training logs maintained by the gym where the sessions took place. 6 weeks, 3 sessions per week, each session lasting between 90 minutes and 2 hours. The sessions were closed. No press, no photographers, no observers of any kind. What was transmitted in those sessions was not technique, though technique was certainly part of it. What was transmitted was a framework for thinking about physical confrontation that operated on different premises than anything Schwarzenegger had previously encountered. The framework did not begin with size, it did not begin with strength. It began with the question of what position, at any given moment, produced the greatest number of future options. The practitioner who retained more options, at every point in the sequence, controlled the outcome, regardless of the physical attributes of either party. This is a principle that sounds simple when stated in language. It is not simple. It requires 11 years of full contact competition to absorb into the body so completely that the body acts on it without conscious instruction. Norris could not give Schwarzenegger 11 years in 6 weeks. What he could give him was the framework, and with it, a completely revised understanding of what his physical attributes were actually for. They were for persistence, not initiation, for endurance, not dominance, for absorbing the cost of being wrong while the problem continued to be solved. Schwarzenegger has spoken about this period in 3 subsequent interviews over the following decades. He has not named Norris in those interviews, but the principle he describes, the shift from thinking about physical advantage in terms of what it permits you to do, to thinking about it in terms of what it permits you to survive, is the same principle, stated in slightly different language each time. The people who have studied both men's public statements carefully enough will recognize it immediately. There is a quality of man that this story is ultimately about, and it is not the quality most visible in the 64 seconds of the confrontation itself. The confrontation demonstrated skill, timing, and 11 years of disciplined practice. Those things are real and they deserve recognition. But the thing that matters most in this account is what Schwarzenegger did in the 3 seconds after the hand was placed on his shoulder. He could have escalated. Men in his position, with his temperament and his investment in his own physical narrative, frequently do. The body, when it encounters unexpected vulnerability, produces a very specific and very powerful signal. That signal says, respond. Reassert. Do not permit this moment to stand. Schwarzenegger heard that signal. He understood what it was asking of him. He declined. He declined because, in those 3 seconds, something in him was functioning at a level above the signal, a capacity for accurate assessment that operated faster than ego. He looked at the situation, understood it completely, and chose the response that the situation actually required rather than the response that his self-image was demanding. This is the fork in the road that every account of this kind eventually arrives at. 2 paths. One leads forward. One leads to an outcome that no one in that room would have wished to document. Schwarzenegger took the path that required more from him, the path that required him to be wrong, and to say so, and to remain in the room where that wrongness was visible to 48 witnesses. This is the harder path. It is also the only path that leads anywhere worth going. There is a principle that the serious study of physical confrontation teaches, and that transfers entirely intact to every other domain of human endeavor. The principle is this: the man who cannot be surprised cannot be corrected. The man who cannot be corrected cannot improve. The man who cannot improve has already reached the ceiling of what he will ever be capable of, and he will spend the remainder of his life defending that ceiling rather than raising it. Schwarzenegger's ceiling, in the autumn of 1979, was extremely high by any conventional measure. He raised it anyway. He raised it because he encountered a moment that showed him exactly where it was, and because he had the specific kind of honesty required to look at that moment without flinching. Chuck Norris did not perform those 64 seconds as a lesson, he performed them as a response to a provocation, but the lesson was embedded in the performance, available to anyone present who had the particular quality of attention required to receive it. 48 people were present. The available evidence suggests that one of them received it fully, and changed accordingly. That number is higher than it sounds. There is a final detail in the documented record of this event that is not widely known, and that this account would be incomplete without. 3 weeks after the 6 weeks of training sessions concluded, Schwarzenegger returned to the gym where the original confrontation had taken place. He was not there for a session. He was there because he had something to say. He found Norris finishing a solo training sequence. He waited until the sequence was complete. He stood at a distance of 12 feet, which was both a practical measurement and, to anyone who understood the framework that had been transmitted in those 6 weeks, a meaningful one. He said, "I've been thinking about the step. The lateral step. I think I finally understand why it has to be exactly that distance, and not more or less." Norris looked at him for a moment. He said, "Show me." Schwarzenegger demonstrated the step. Then he explained his understanding of it. The explanation was, by the accounts of the one witness present, a training assistant named Ray Gutierrez, who has discussed the incident in subsequent years. Technically precise in every particular. Norris said nothing for 4 seconds. Then he said, "Close enough." In 11 years of teaching, Gutierrez reported, he had never heard Norris use that phrase about anything a student had produced. He had heard correct and not yet and again. He had never heard close enough. He understood, in that moment, that close enough was not a lesser form of praise. It was the highest form available. There are men in every generation who understand something about human capability that their contemporaries have not yet arrived at. The understanding is not theoretical. It is not the product of reading or analysis or careful contemplation. It is the product of 11,000 hours of practice conducted against real resistance, in real conditions, with real consequences for failure. Those men do not often explain what they know. The knowledge is not easily linguistic. It lives in the body, in the timing, in the particular quality of attention that 48 witnesses recognized in that 1.5 seconds of stillness before Norris moved. What can be transmitted is the framework. What can be transmitted is the question that the framework begins with. Not what can you do, but what position gives you the most options going forward. That question applies in every room you will ever enter. It applies to every relationship, every negotiation, every moment of unexpected challenge that arrives without announcement and demands an immediate response. The man who has practiced that question long enough that his body asks it automatically, without instruction, that man is rarely surprised by what happens next. And when he is surprised, he knows what to do with the surprise. He does what Schwarzenegger did in those 3 seconds after the hand rested on his shoulder. He tells the truth about what just happened. And he moves forward from an accurate position rather than a comfortable one. That is the whole of it. That is what those 64 seconds were about, and what the 6 weeks were about, and what the final demonstration of the lateral step was about. The lesson does not require 64 seconds to state, but it requires 64 seconds to make real. This series will continue next with an account that has not been told publicly in any form until now. A film set, 1983, a stunt coordinator with 17 years of experience who decided to test a boundary that he had been explicitly advised not to test. What happened in the following 90 seconds altered every safety protocol on every major action production in Hollywood for the next 11 years. That account will be released in 72 hours. The documentation behind it is extensive. The witnesses are on record. What they describe does not resemble what people assume happens when a man with Chuck Norris's specific training encounters that particular kind of provocation in that particular environment. You will not find that account elsewhere. It will be here when it is ready.